Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea announces the details of a massive expansion of its vaccine campaign in the second quarter, shooting for 10 million more doses given for a total of 12 million by June. South Korea's exports in the tech sector surged in February, the 9th month in a row they've been higher, led by strong demand for semiconductors. And top officials in the Biden administration are due to visit Seoul this week. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Their aim, apparently, to repair ties between South Korea and Japan, two key U.S. allies. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. First, the latest on the coronavirus situation in South Korea. The daily number of new cases fell below 400 today for the first time in 7 days. But the authorities say that was likely due to fewer tests being done over the weekend. There were 382 new cases on Monday, bringing total cases to date to more than 96,000. Of the new cases, 370 were locally transmitted and 12 were imported. Most of them were in the greater Seoul area. Cluster infections continue at mainly at workplaces and business sites in the capital region and from personal meetings and saunas elsewhere. There were 6 more deaths, bringing the death toll to 1,675. The health authorities have revealed the details of South Korea's vaccination campaign for the second quarter of the year. The goal is to scale up massively and get first doses to nearly 10 million more people, including older adults, teachers, and essential social workers. Lee Kyung-eun has the details.
By the end of this month, South Korea aims to have administered 1.2 million doses, and the goal for the second quarter is to do another 10 million, targeting 6 priority groups. Top of the list are people aged 65 and older, separate from seniors in nursing facilities who already started getting their shots in the first quarter. There are around 8.5 million seniors who get this round, and first in line will be the oldest.
For people 75 and older who have issues with mobility and registering online, the government will team up with local administrations to provide a wide-ranging service from registration and transport to the vaccination site, the inoculation process itself, the trip home, and post-vaccination monitoring.
Next in line will be some 250,000 workers and residents at high-risk care facilities for disabled people and the elderly. The government has also decided to inoculate patients on chronic dialysis. There were several new priority groups to make the final 6 on the list. First, teachers, amid growing calls to protect schools that have recently reopened for the spring semester. Those inoculations will be done in phases, starting with those at special schools for disabled children, then to kindergartens and the lowest grades in elementary school. In the healthcare sector, the second quarter will be for staff working in dentistry at Oriental medicine clinics and at pharmacies, healthcare workers on the front lines having already gotten their first doses in the first quarter. Essential public sector workers like police officers, firefighters, and army soldiers will be vaccinated sooner than originally planned. Also, flight attendants to prevent them from potentially bringing in the new variants, since they're currently exempt from the country's mandatory 2-week self-quarantine. With these new groups, the government is aiming for a total of 12 million doses administered by the end of the second quarter. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
And President Moon Jae-in and First Lady Kim Jungsuk will get their first vaccine doses next week, ahead of a scheduled trip to the UK to attend the G7 summit. They'll be getting the vaccine made by AstraZeneca on Tuesday.
March 23rd is when the country will start giving doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine to those 65 and older. The first couple will get priority that day, so as to ease concerns over the vaccine's safety and efficacy.
President Moon is 68 and First Lady Kim is 66. Moon has been invited to attend the in-person G7 meeting due to take place in the UK between June 11th and the 13th. His first dose was expected in late March, given that the AstraZeneca jab requires 2 doses within a time frame of 8 to 12 weeks, and considering the time it takes to build immunity. The Blue House officials who will accompany the president will also get their shots on the same day. And the Moon administration, in the remainder of the president's term, says it'll be focusing on eradicating corruption and establishing transparency and fairness in the real estate market. President Moon today asked politicians to stop using the land speculation scandal as a political tool because it's a problem, he says, that has persisted for so long and is something they should address together. Here's President Moon on Monday in a meeting with senior aides at the Blue House.
공직자가 직무를 이용해 부당한 이익을 얻을 수 없도록 이해충돌방지법의 신속한 제정에 힘을 모으면서 비정상적인 부동산 거래와 불법 투기를 감독하는 기구를 설치하는 등 부정한 투기의 역사에 종지부를 찍을 수 있도록 근본적 제도 개혁에 함께 나서 주시기 바랍니다.
He added that the government will do its best to move ahead on schedule with its latest measures to boost the supply of homes by 830,000 units nationwide in the coming years. And he asked the cabinet to speed up process on the related legislation. In other news, South Korea's exports in the tech sector rose last month for the 9th month in a row, mainly on soaring demand in the pandemic for semiconductors and displays. The country's automobile sector also did well. Jaein has more.
South Korea's ICT exports went up for the 9th straight month, mainly on the back of robust shipments of semiconductors. A report released on Wednesday by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy showed that the country's ICT exports rose by more than 11.5% on year in February to more than $15 billion. This is the second highest amount of exports recorded for the month of February. The solid export figures were led by semiconductors, which took up around 1/5 of the country's outbound shipments. Semiconductor exports increased for the 8th month in a row, rising by around 12.5% compared to the same period last year. Exports of displays also jumped by more than 20% and mobile phones by 15%. One expert says ICT exports were boosted by COVID-19.
Due to the pandemic, demand for semiconductors that go into IT products were strong. Also, exports of semiconductors are rising with continuous upgrades in internet data centers. Exports of displays have also soared as demand for TVs increased amid the pandemic.
Meanwhile, South Korea's automobile sector also thrived in February, with production, domestic consumption, and exports all increasing for 2 straight months. Automobile production skyrocketed by nearly 40% compared to the same month a year earlier, with more than 260,000 vehicles rolling off the production line as global demand increased. Domestic consumption also jumped by around 24% on year, mainly led by new model launches including Hyundai Motors Genesis and Kia's Carnival. Exports also soared by 35% as sales in the global automobile market improved. Outbound shipments of eco-friendly cars reached $700 million, which is the highest figure for the month of February. Jaein, Arirang News.
South Korea has fared better than many other major economies in the pandemic. Data from the OECD suggests that the economy last year was the 10th biggest in the world, a rise from the previous year of 2 spots. The OECD puts the country's nominal GDP last year at a little over $1.62 trillion. That's actually slightly higher than the estimate for Canada by about $4 billion. So if those end up being the final figures, then South Korea would rank 9th for the first time. The price of Bitcoin surpassed another milestone on Sunday, crossing $60,000 for the first time. And in terms of the Korean currency, it broke through 70 million won. According to the local exchange Upbit, the price of a single Bitcoin reached a high of 71.45 million won. Transactions on Korea's 4 main exchanges on Sunday came to almost $14.7 billion, which is more than the average daily volume on the main stock index, the Kospi. Year to date, through February 25th, trading volume for all digital currencies in Korea was more than $390 billion, surpassing the local crypto trade for all of last year. Now our Seoul has a look ahead at some news and data on the economy to come out in the week ahead. Korea's import and export prices from last month, along with jobs data, and the Federal Reserve's monthly meeting as investors closely watch for inflation.
On Tuesday, the Bank of Korea will present its monthly export and import prices for February. According to its latest report, South Korea's export and import prices increased from December last year to January. Export prices rose 1.8% and import prices increased 2.8% in January compared to the previous month. An increase in international crude prices mainly contributed to the rise. Dubai crude, Korea's benchmark, rose 10% to around $55 per barrel in the same period. In the U.S., the Federal Open Market Committee will meet from Tuesday to Wednesday local time. Market watchers expect investors' focus to be on whether the central bank will announce its stance on the recent rise in long-term Treasury yield. The 10-year U.S. Treasury yield briefly reached 1.64% last Friday, its highest level in more than a year. It has been increasing since last summer, but the rise has accelerated recently, causing volatility in stock prices. The FOMC hosts 8 regularly scheduled meetings during the year, and its next meeting is on April 27th. On Wednesday, Statistics Korea will release the employment figures for February. In January, the number of people employed in South Korea was at its lowest in more than 20 years when the country faced the Asian financial crisis. The figure was around 25.8 million, down almost 4% from the same month last year. Considering the fact that South Korea is still under a third wave of coronavirus infections, it is widely expected that sluggish hiring data will be reflected in February's report. 서은경, 아리랑 뉴스.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Jungsuk, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, good to have you back on.
Happy to be here.
Well, on Wall Street, the Dow and the S&P ended higher on Friday and for the week as well, though as we've seen lately, a weakness on the tech-heavy NASDAQ. What's the story in the global markets, and what should we look for in the week ahead?
Okay, well, if you look at last week, it actually hit record highs on Wednesday and Thursday for Dow and S&P. And then the markets were split on Friday, Dow rising strongly at 4%, S&P rising roughly a level at 0.10%, and NASDAQ down 0.6%. But while the Friday's results were mixed, markets did hit record highs on Wednesday and Thursday. Dow hit a record high on Friday because it rose slightly from the record levels that they had on Thursday. It went above 32,000. S&P also hit a closing record, but NASDAQ did not hit new records because tech stocks have been slowing down lately. But the tech stocks did have the biggest rally since November, and NASDAQ, even though it's a bit lackluster, it did do fairly well last week. It recovered some of the losses that it had from the week before last week. And the reasons are attributed to the Biden stimulus $1.9 trillion package, very quickly proceeding vaccination in the United States. About 20% of the U.S. Population has received at least one dose of the vaccine, and President Biden has said that it may be possible to return to normality as early as July 4th. Treasury yields are the a factor that makes people nervous, but still, a lot of analysts have pointed out that even though 10-year yields are rising, if you look at it in terms of interest rates and inflation, it's still in the negative range. So the markets were doing very well last week overall. Europe followed U.S., rose most of the last week, but it split on Friday. FTSE and CAC were up, but DAX were down. But all three indices were positive for the week. Asian markets were mixed last week, and today it seems that the Asian markets are looking at what FOMC will to this week. Nikkei rose all of last week and today. Shanghai and Hong Kong, it fell early last week, then rose latter part of the week. Shanghai has fallen nearly 1% today. Hang Seng rose slightly.
And it was mixed here in Korea today as we started the week. The Kospi trying to break out during the session, but ultimately down. A slight gain on the Kosdaq. Tell us about the local market.
Okay, well, the Korean markets seem to be waiting and seeing what the Fed FOMC does as well. The Kospi was up and down down and then up last week, and it was down 0.28% today. Kosdaq was, as with Kosdaq, it was down and up last week. It was up 0.15% today.
And now, Professor, the Korean economy, as a report noted earlier, has fared relatively well compared to some others in the pandemic, and it looks like it's going to rise in the rankings in terms of size, possibly even to be the 9th biggest economy in the world in terms of nominal GDP. That would be a first. What do you make of these projections?
Okay, well, you have to remember that this is basically because, not necessarily because Korean economy was strong, but because Korea did social distancing and controlling the coronavirus very well, especially if you look at the second quarter last year. Because of the rampage in coronavirus, most European countries and the U.S. went into a shutdown and a lockdown. Not only did the economic activities fall naturally because of the coronavirus, but government actually paralyzed the economy. They kept people from going to work. They kept a lot of businesses from opening because they wanted to halt the spread of the coronavirus. And that accounts for a lot of reduction in the economies of these European countries and the United States that was reflected at the growth rate for the year. Now, if you look at the growth rates, only one country in the top 15 economies had a positive growth rate. That was China at 2.3%. That's nominal growth rate. And Korea had the second. Well, I don't think you could call it the largest growth rate. Let's call it the least negative growth rate at minus 1.0%. All other countries had negative growth rates ranging from minus 2.5% to minus 11%, the top 15 economies. So I think Korea should be congratulating itself that we did the distancing and controlling the coronavirus well. So Korea never went into a lockdown and shutdown, which allowed us to rise in the rankings. But this is a two-sided coin. This means that when the economy recovers, whether it be this year or next year, Korea will have the least bounce back. So Korea is expected to have a very small bounce back compared to the other major economies which took a larger hit. And then when we go back to so-called normality, we'll be going back into the normality of 2019, where Korea had a lackluster growth rate. So yes, I'm happy that Korea may be rising one rank to 9th position this year, but we cannot guarantee that Korea will stay there.
Got it. Perhaps have to temper our expectations a little then. Professor, we're up against the clock, so we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much, as always, for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you.
Senior officials from the Biden administration are due to visit South Korea and Japan this week. And ahead of that, the U.S. has emphasized the need for robust and effective trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo on issues like North Korea's denuclearization. Yoon Jung-min reports.
The U.S. State Department says no relationship is more important than the Seoul-Washington-Tokyo relationship. In a statement on Sunday, the department said the U.S. continues to promote trilateral cooperation against COVID-19 and climate change, as well as reinvigorating cooperation on the denuclearization of North Korea. This comes ahead of the planned visits to Seoul and Tokyo this week by Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. They plan to have so-called 2+2 meetings with their South Korean and Japanese counterparts. The Biden administration is apparently seeking to mend the Seoul-Tokyo ties that have been weakened over a series of historical issues. While the U.S. is reviewing its new North Korea policy, one of the agendas during the visits to Seoul and Tokyo is Korean Peninsula affairs. A senior State Department official, Sung Kim, said the U.S. is expected to complete its North Korea policy in a few weeks, adding the upcoming visit will provide great opportunities for the Asian allies to offer their own input into a new North Korea policy. Reuters reported that Pyongyang has been unresponsive to behind-the-scenes attempts by Washington to reach out. The Biden administration has reportedly used multiple channels since February, but hasn't received any response from Pyongyang. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
On Sunday, the music industry's biggest awards show, the Grammys, was held in Los Angeles. K-pop fans were hoping for superstars BTS to win the top prize, but this wasn't to be their year. They've already won the industry's other top awards, and experts say a Grammy could only be a matter of time. Kim Bo-kyung has this report.
All eyes were on music's biggest night, the 63rd Grammy Awards, which took place on Sunday local time. There was high anticipation among K-pop fans over whether global megastars BTS would be able to snatch the last big prize for Best Pop Duo Group Performance with the song Dynamite, but they were pipped to the top prize by Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande's Rain on Me. Experts have said that the Grammys haven't shown flexibility towards singers from a variety of countries in the past.
If you look at the history of the Grammys, who has won and who the Recording Academy has thought is deserving of an award versus public opinion versus the zeitgeist, there has been a disconnect. That could have come into play.
However, experts agree that BTS, being the first Korean and Asian pop act to be nominated in the Best Pop Duo Group Performance category since its introduction in 2012, and being the first Korean artist to have done a solo performance at the award show is significant in itself. An expert added that it's only a matter of time before BTS tastes victory at the Grammys.
The Grammys ask for substantiality and continuity, and they have already recognized that BTS isn't just a trend that will pass by. It's only a matter of time, of how long they will continue their work, such as releasing albums and doing lots of shows.
Meanwhile, Korean-American violist Richard Yongjae O'Neill won the Best Classical Instrumental Solo category. He picked up his first Grammy Award with conductor David Allen Miller of the Albany Symphony Orchestra. The trophy was awarded for their recording of Concerto for Viola and Chamber Orchestra by Christopher Theophanidis. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
According to a human rights group, security forces in Myanmar killed at least 38 people on Sunday, the bloodiest day since last month's coup. The Chinese embassy there is urging the authorities to take action to protect China's local factories, several of which were looted or burned, and asking them to punish the perpetrators. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Another bloody day of protests in Myanmar. The Assistance Association for Political Prisoners said Sunday that at least 38 people were killed in the latest crackdown against anti-coup protesters. The advocacy group says 126 people have been killed since the military coup last month, adding that casualties are drastically increasing. The latest deaths were a result of security forces opening fire on protesters in Yangon, with gunshots heard continuously throughout the day. At least 3 deaths were also reported in other parts of the country, including Mandalay and Bago. According to state television, a police officer also died of a chest wound after a confrontation with protesters. It's the second policeman death since the protests started. Citing the latest clash, the military government has declared martial law over 2 townships in Yangon. On the same day, the Chinese embassy in Myanmar called on authorities to take measures to stop the violence and punish perpetrators after several Chinese-invested factories in Yangon were looted or destroyed. According to the embassy's website, some Chinese employees were also injured. The embassy wants local police to guarantee the safety of the Chinese companies as well as their personnel. It also issued a safety warning to all Chinese companies and nationals in Myanmar. At least 12 Chinese-run factories, most of them producing clothes, were looted or burned. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.